Hey everyone, good evening. What's involuntary simplicity? How did our next guest find happiness by downsizing? What I really want to know, did his friends think that he was crazy? We're going to learn all about the life choices that he made to make his life much happier. So in tonight's Get Off the Couch segment, last night we had our Thrive series on finding attracting love, and it was wonderful. It was our most attended event. And as the panelists were talking, I was thinking about my boyfriend. And, you know, every time I have a guest on the show, I always learn something. I listen. And one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do this week is to really pay attention to your thoughts. Last week, my boyfriend said to me, well, you know, women should have meat on their bones. And of course, my first reaction was, you think I'm fat? Now, luckily, I didn't say this out loud. I'm just thinking this in my head, because in the past, that would have been my first response. So I said, okay, let's take a step back here. You are hearing that you're fat, but what he is saying to you is he loves you and finds you attractive. So you need to concentrate on really what's being said and know when something's your issue or not. You know, and so many times we have thousands of thoughts every day. I want you to practice this week really listening to your thoughts. And if you have a negative thought, stop it and rethink for something positive. All right, let's tell you about tonight's guest. Steve Bhaerman is an internationally known author, humorist, and workshop leader. For the past 25 years, he has written and performed as Swami Beyondananda, the cosmic comic. His comedy has been described as comedy disguised as wisdom and wisdom disguised as comedy. Marianne Williamson has called him the Mark Twain of our generation. Steve also writes a political blog with a spiritual perspective, Notes from the Trail. His latest book, written with Bruce Lipton, is Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future and a Way to Get There from Here. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, and thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for the bio. That's good.
And, you know, how we met was Steve was actually in the Raleigh-Durham area doing a workshop, and someone was like, hey, your buddy Bruce Lipton's on this show. You might want to check him out. And we loved Bruce. He was a great guest. Read the book. I highly recommend it to people. We actually talked about his first book, so we'll have to have you both on to talk about this book. But wonderful book to everyone. I recommend it. But let's get started, because I have lots of comments on Twitter and the blog and everything that I've written about. What is involuntary simplicity?
Well, you know, there was a book written in the early 1980s by Duane Elgin called Voluntary Simplicity. And the idea back then was that if we voluntarily chose to downsize our consumption, and of course you could still upsize your happiness even if you downsize your consumption, then we would be able to share the resources on the planet and have a much easier time. Well, now it's 30 years up the line, and what I've been calling involuntary simplicity, kind of a joke, but it's also kind of an evolutionary imperative that's happening right now. So Julie, you mentioned Bruce Lipton, who's my co-author in a book called Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future, and a Way to Get There from Here. And Bruce is an evolutionary biologist, and one of the things, the key points in the book, is that in the world of evolution, crisis precipitates evolution. Around us, at all of the world situations and maybe our local situations, we look at all these crises and we'd say, the chances of precipitation are about 100%. So change is happening, and that's the involuntary part. However, the voluntary part is, do we flow with the change? Do we embrace the change? Do we resist the change? And do we use the change to catapult us to an entirely different level? So when my wife, Trudy, who would be on with me tonight, but she's not here at this very moment, when my wife Trudy and I looked at our situation about 2 or 3 years ago, we recognized that we were being called upon to leave our beautiful home in Santa Rosa, California, that we had for about 12 years. We didn't own it. We rented it, which is how we liked it. And we simply could not sustain the expenses. And when I wrote the story, I called it A Tale of Woe, as in WHOA, whoa, because we just said whoa to this game of chasing after a high overhead. And as this place, it was rather challenging to do that because if you can imagine, putting your love into a place for 12 years, uh, having a lot of really wonderful, dying without ending. It was kind of a death to be releasing this place. And as soon as we did, there are a couple of things that happened. First of all, we felt this tremendous wave of freedom because whatever we have has us. And, as they say that stuff happens, but really stuff accumulates. And everything that you have has to be managed. It has to be cared for. It has to be cultivated. And life was calling us in an entirely different direction. And so we set out on the road in a piece of we call it wheel estate. We had a little RV for the first month because we did some shows that we were camping. And then we pretty much settled into our little Chevy HHR. And that's the vehicle that we have mainly been traveling in. And we are now settled back in Santa Rosa, California, in a much smaller, much more suitable place. Our lives are greatly simplified. And what that means is that we can concentrate far more on the things that we're really here to do rather than figuring out how to manage a bunch of stuff.
Steve, would you say that it was a crisis point? You looked at the finances, if I'm understanding correctly, managing the house that really started you down this path. You're like, whoa, we just can't do that. Because I think a lot of people have to reach that crisis point before they're willing to take that next step. Now, it's interesting. I have been meeting more people who are starting the process a bit earlier before the crisis. Like I have a friend turning 50 and they're talking, the kids are out of the house. And so they're talking about selling the house and moving to a condo. But I'd like you to address that. If you think people need to reach a crisis or how they can maybe decide this before the crisis occurs.
That's a really good question and a good insight because crisis is normally what bumps people out of the usual. Now, if we had signals earlier on that it wasn't sustainable, but the entire process of moving, of dismantling, was so overwhelming that we kept finding reasons to stay. And, there's a saying, eking out an existence. And that's when you look at your checkbook balance and you go, eek! Because we had what we call a near-debt experience. And so we actually were in a financial crisis. And at one point, I looked at my two bank accounts and the balance in one was, I think it was $1.45 and the other one, I think, had about 18 cents in it. And I just started laughing because it was so absolutely ridiculous. And so I think in a certain sense, one of the things that Bruce Lipton and I talk about in spontaneous evolution is the idea of fractals, that the same patterns repeat themselves at different levels of complexity. And so crises or downsizing that individuals are going through, it really is a representation.
Steve, we need you just to repeat that last thought. We lost you.
So okay, I'm found. Yeah. What happens is that we are essentially the individual crises that people are going through are a microcosm of the general crisis that we've used up and monetized a lot of the resources that we have. So at the next phase of reorganization, it's really about using our resources so much more efficiently and effectively and focusing on maximizing happiness. I think it's the country of, I'm trying to remember the name of the country, in Bhutan. They have a gross national happiness.
Steve, we're losing you. Oh, yeah, we lost.
Hey, everyone. We are going to get Steve back on the line. We've got some great questions here in chat. So when we get a moment, I will chat the questions to Steve. I appreciate y'all being here tonight. I think this is a great subject. By day, my business is healing through organization. I'm a professional organizer, so I work with people to downsize. I'm very passionate about being green and bringing that in the organizing. And I can tell you, for the most part, we all have way too much stuff, and our lives would be a lot easier. Luckily, my goal is to do this show, so if I lose all my organizing business, then I will be the Reawaken your host all time, full time. All right, we've got Steve back. Okay, sometimes technical stuff happens, so I'll let you start over again with that thought, and then, Steve, we've got several questions here for you on chat.
But wait a second, Steve, let me ask you something. You don't have any other programs running on your laptop, like your email and backup and things like that, do you?
No backup. Let me close out everything that's on the desktop.
You should close everything other than Skype, and you can do it while you're talking if you want to.
Okay, good. I'm going to close everything out. Everything must close.
And while you're closing out, we've got a nice little comment here, Steve, I want to read to you from Debbie Bruck, who also happens to be a show host here, great world-renowned homeopathy woman. If you ever get a chance, listen to her show Mondays at 11. But she writes, "How marvelous to meet you. I've been doing and watching the laughing therapy for many, many years." Well, if you were good, we will get to that later, but we're definitely going to talk about downsizing. And Debbie quotes you here, "Key to happiness. To be happy in life, you must be able to take a joke. And if you can leave a few as well, all the better." From Swami. All right, excellent. I think that's very important. So, Steve, we're going to have you finish that thought, and then we've got a couple questions for you here on chat.
Okay. So essentially, I think we're at the point now where we have to actually focus much more on cultivating happiness rather than on having so many things as kind of a shield against living. You know, we've in this country have been so habituated to buying stuff. We live in this consumer culture where there's one more thing, there's something outside of ourselves that we need. And in fact, the entire economy is based on people buying things that essentially they don't need. So a part of my other mission, which of course includes comedy, that I call the evolutionary upwising, because people are waking up and wising up, is recognizing that we have really all that we require, and it's really a matter of the way that we organize ourselves as a species. So that's part of the simplicity.
Which is, it's amazing if you think about it. We tend to make it more complex when it really, really is very simple. For our first question on chat for you, and I want to remind everyone, chat a question. I'll be happy to ask Steve, or you can call in at 919-518-9773 or Skype Computers 2K Voice. Sherry asks, don't you think abundance is good, to not be misunderstood as greed?
Well, yes, I think that's a wonderful distinction. That abundance is what we have when we can freely give, and of course, right now, my wife and I are very abundant. We're living in a very beautiful place. We have what we required. But because we bumped down our overhead, we have a lot more freedom, and began to recognize over this 2-year period how little we actually require. And when we were on the road, just in our little car, we were just overjoyed, because our lives were simpler. There was a lot more room for novelty and synchronicity. Something really interesting, and part of abundance is having more synchronicities in our lives. So a year ago, we had been on the road for about 6 months, and I had the opportunity to write a book with somebody which required somewhere for a period of time. And we had 3 wonderful Santas who offered their gifts to us: Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, and Santa Rosa. 3 Santas. We think that's very funny. And so we chose the place in Santa Rosa because it's near where we lived and where we have stuff in storage. One of the things we have in storage is a really beautiful Scandinavian designed, Italian made bedroom set. It's really gorgeous. And we bought it 13, 14 years ago. It's like new. It's in storage. We get to the place that we're going to be staying. And in the bedroom, there is the exact same bedroom furniture. We've never seen it anywhere else. So this is abundance. The universe conspired to create this tremendous abundance for us to have our beautiful bedroom set without taking it out of storage.
I love that. And I'm dating an Italian, so that makes me even happier. And we've got a couple great questions here for you on chat, Steve. Chevrolet Man says, I want to make money. Is this a bad thing?
Well, I think that there's nothing wrong with money. And again, this is not about money or not money. It's a matter of one's own mission and vision in life. And often, I know that there's probably people out there who have taken jobs that maybe they don't love, and they keep thinking, if I do this for money for the next 2, 5, 10 years, then I will be able to do what I really am here to do, my heart's desire. And, I think that was part of the old model. Part of the old model was you worked a period of time, and then when you retired, you could do what you want. Well, there's a lot of job insecurity nowadays, and people who have opted for security are getting bumped out of their secure jobs, and they're facing the same kind of insecurity anyway. So I think that there's a difference in terms of making money. What I've learned is that money is a byproduct of service. And what I found myself doing, I'm an artist and, love to create things, and, that's been driving me for most of my life. What I noticed in this period of time before we left the overhead and just said, whoa, is I found myself doing things for money. I found myself stretching. I found myself, in a certain regard, leaving the center of who I was because of this urgency about making money. And so I decided that there's nothing wrong with making money. I simply was not going to participate in the urgency of it. And so consequently, by lowering our overhead, we have a lot more freedom right now and a lot more flexibility.
I think that's wonderful. And, that's my goal, to make enough money to have the freedom and the flexibility. Right now, I'm my own boss. You can't put a price tag on that. I made, definitely more money doing other things, but they owned me. And I don't desire to be owned by anyone. We've got another excellent question for you here on chat, Steve. Warrior Spirits asks, what are examples of things we really don't need but spend a lot of time collecting?
Well, for every individual, it's something different. I think that part of it, we're so habituated by our childhood. So if we had a childhood where, like, for example, my wife, she is hugely resourceful because her mother was hugely resourceful. Her mother didn't get a lot of spending money from her dad, and so she had to improvise and get bargains and bargains and bargains. Well, Trudy is a phenomenal bargain getter. In fact, she hires herself out as a chaperone, so she goes with you when you go shopping. So in a certain regard, though, it's also made her more of a pack rat. So when we lived in our place, she would come back from garage sales, and I'm going, and she'd say, but it was only $1. I said, well, and so, if you live by the stuff, then you got to deal with this stuff. So I think that what she did, this was a tremendous spiritual practice that she did. When we decided to move, we had a very short amount of time. We had 2 months to dismantle everything, to decide, is it going to be in the garage sale? Are we going to give it to Goodwill? Are we going to keep it? And so Trudy would ask the question, is this my love now? And anything that she didn't get a yes, this is my love now, went in the garage sale and giveaway pile.
I love that. I'm going to quote her on that, because when we had some technical difficulties, I mentioned that my business is healing through organization. So I'm a professional organizer, who specializes in being green. I'm about repurposing, and people challenge me all the time, and there are people who are green, but they want to hold on to everything. And so I'm like, say, do you need it? Do you love it? Do you use it? But do you love it now? I'm going to borrow that, and I will quote Trudy till the cows come home. But I think that's a wonderful question. And so you use that during this process.
Yes, and that was her discipline, because she was the one with most of the stuff. So she and our friend Ruth, who helped us, and I would have to say without Ruth, we would have been ruthless. Between Trudy and Ruth, they packed everything. They put it in storage. We gave away lots and lots of stuff. We sold stuff in the garage sale. And now, because we live close to our storage unit in a furnished place, we are seeing precisely which of the things we actually do need. We had and still do have, stuff that, Trudy's mom had in Germany, just amazing down comforters and stuff. And when we had our big house and anybody needed any down comforters, they come to us and they get down. So, but at this point, our life focus has changed. Trudy is focusing much more on her creative process in the arts and in working with people in healthy skincare products. And I'm doing writing, and we're going to get back on the road at some point later this year and do some shows. But I feel a tremendous amount of freedom, and also in releasing the energy of that place. We lived in a very beautiful place, but in I don't know how many people are familiar with Vedic science, but there's a state called tamasic, which is when something is actually overripe and starting to smell. And we had a very, very beautiful place, but it became tamasic. In other words, we had stayed there a little bit too long. We had begun to stagnate. And these are times, the people are probably noticing that things are happening very quickly. There's a lot of change, and a lot of the change is involuntary. It seems like it's involuntary. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to leave my beautiful home? Why is this relationship ending? Why did I lose my job? Why do I feel betrayed by my guru or whatever it is? And these are times for reevaluation, and every opportunity, every pain that we have, any symptom, any challenge is an opportunity to ask, what is the bigger thing that I am being called to here?
I think that's great, Steve, because that's kind of going to dovetail, and this might be your answer. We've got an outstanding question here from Pebbles on chat, and she asked, what would you say to the people who bought more house than they can afford and are now losing them? Now, again, you discussed that, and I think there's a bigger spiritual message, but what would you say to them?
Well, there's nothing to say. I have nothing to say to people. I mean, everybody is getting it for themselves. There was a period of time where we got totally caught up, Trudy and I, like so many other people, in this idea that everything is expanding, and that, if real estate is worth this much now, it's going to be worth that much more then, and next year we'll do better. And we got, strung out on this hopium, or whatever you want to call it, that things are going to get better. It's interesting right now, the place that we're staying at a separate apartment in a house that's owned by some friends of ours who bought this house probably about 5 years ago. And it's a very big house. It's more house than they want. So our being down here is something that is part of the involuntary simplicity. We're helping them out. Our being here is helping them out financially. They're helping us out. They're sharing a place bigger than they can use. And, we have a totally private portion of the house. So I think that a lot of people, there's a number of reasons why people are losing their places. I think that partly the economy has been looted. I think there's things happening at different levels, where you have to recognize that in the days where our parents and grandparents were able to own a home on a single income, that's really changed. That's really not the case anymore. And I think it's because we've gotten so stretched out as a civilization to where we're, the only way that the economy could continue to grow during that period before it went kablooey was through all of these derivatives of derivatives of derivatives, which is really imaginary money, betting on something that's going to happen in the future. It's not even based on anything that's real now, because we have used up a tremendous amount of resources as a species, and all of the responsibility and the costs have been externalized, meaning that when we decide how much something costs, we don't really factor in the entire cost of having that thing exist. So we are able to have food come from around the world. We're able to have an economy that's based on buying a new whatchamacallit, as soon as the old one wears out, rather than fixing the old one. It's obsolete. Who wants to fix it? So we're learning to reuse and recycle. This has been a tremendous humility, in a good way, for individuals. We know people who, thought they were millionaires on paper, and on paper they were, but in reality, they've lost their homes and so on. And, these may be individual karmic lessons, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's also a karmic lesson for our entire civilization to focus on, quite simply, what is really sacred and what is really important.
What were the biggest challenges for you on downsizing? What would you say?
Well, first of all, as we watched a period of time as we began to dismantle things, we sold a futon and pieces are being taken out of my office. It was like watching this entity die. We were in that place for about 12 or 13 years, kind of like the lifespan of a dog, perhaps, a dog or a cat. And it was fresh, it was new, it was born, it had its peak, and here we're watching it die. We're watching this place where we had so much good vibes, so much great energy. Our friends came, our family was there. We had so much love in this house, and it was going to be no more. So I think for me, Taurus rising that I am, letting go of that physical place was really a challenge for me. I think for Trudy, it was not having a home. And so she got very fixated on getting some kind of an RV, even though that really was out of the picture for us. Because in being able to imagine having an RV, it would be like having a home on the road. So there was an emotional adjustment. And then, of course, there's the whole thing of failure, although I don't think we really felt that a lot. I think we really dealt with that. We really cleared that out. But, you're essentially on the road. You're homeless, or we called it home free. We never really felt that we were in danger of falling really through the cracks, because we've got a wonderful social network. But I tell you that there were times over the past year and a half or 2 years where we were really challenged and we weren't sure. And it was a dark night of the soul of, when is this going to turn around? Can it turn around? And what will help it turn around? And I think part of this, part of it has been the individual healing of familial and cultural patterns, I'll put it that way, that things that we learned from our parents about money, things that teach us to cultivate fear, to be greedy because we're afraid of losing something. I had to look at my financial shadow. I had to look at the people who I hadn't paid. I had to look at things that I did that, I told myself I was doing the right thing, but really I was protecting myself. So part of this process has been, looking into my own financial shadow. And, you can't really blame anybody. There's nobody out there. My friend was, he was out on a very, very peaceful lake, and he's in a boat, and he's just floating as the oars are out of the water, and the sun is on his face. There's a little breeze. He hears the lapping sound, and all of a sudden, wham! He gets rammed by another boat, and he's going, who the hell? And he looks in the other boat, and it's another empty boat. There's nobody there. Just another empty boat hit him. And he started laughing. Because who is it out there? We're all in the same boat. It's only an empty boat out there. Whenever we get angry and blame people, who is out there to blame? Who is it? If you really realize it's a reflection of us. That's all we got.
Absolutely. So, we got a couple questions for you. Debbie asked, how did you stop protecting yourself? Don't we need to be protected?
Well, that's a very interesting idea. The first 4 months, each of those 4 months, our overhead was $4,000 less than it had been. So in that regard, we were plus 4,000 every month. And then because we were plus 4,000 every month, money started coming in. It just started coming in. Many years ago, when I first learned about affirmations, this was my first exposure to the law of attraction. I do affirmations, and I had A, B, and C, and the A's were things that I had to have them. And then the B's were things that it'd be nice if I had that. And the C's were things I didn't care about very much. So after 2 months, I was amazed to find that none of my A's happened and all of my B's happened. The A's were the ones I was so attached to that I drove them away. The B's were the ones that I simply said, that would be nice, and let it go. And those were the things that came back and manifested. So in having the financial pressure off, it allowed the natural flow of things to start flowing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, I want to know what your friends and family thought when you all made this announcement. Hey, we're downsizing. We're completely changing our life. Were they supportive? Did they think you were nuts? What was the most reaction that you got from people?
Well, it's funny. Our home in Santa Rosa that we had for 12 years, that place was the place that everyone loved. It's where we had our gatherings every August, every New Year's. We hosted people there. And so nobody wanted us to leave this place. It's like years ago, we had the friends who had a beautiful home. And when we would visit that part of the country, we'd always have our own wing of the house. And these people, they up and got divorced, and I said to Trudy, I said, the nerve of those people, don't they think about anybody else? So I think we partly had to deal with our friends who didn't want to see that place go. I think we've always been very independent, so I don't think that anybody was afraid that something would happen to us. I think we've always surprised people in what we do, So this was just one more surprise. We felt very supported. When we came back to the Bay Area, we had places to stay before we got the place that we're in now. So, I've always subscribed to the, what people think about me is none of my business. So that was pretty much, we knew it was right for us. And so, when you know something is right for you, the whole universe falls in line. You don't get that much resistance.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. What in this journey would you say is the most surprising? Maybe you were like, wow, I never would have thought I would have felt this or experienced that. What's been most surprising on this journey?
The most surprising thing was how quickly I let go of that beautiful home. You know, we were there. I don't even describe it. It was just an amazing place. And so as soon as we were out of there, that was it. I kept looking for, okay, when am I going to start feeling this longing? And it just never happened. We drive by there, and I'm completely complete with that place. So I think we said our goodbyes, we did our mourning, and being catapulted into a new life in a certain regard strengthened Trudy's and my relationship with each other. Because in a way, in the big house, we each had our little corner. We would, retreat to our corners and do our little thing. And then being on the road in this little car, we're both looking out at the same horizon. And that was really inspiring. And magic began to happen. And we realized that we had lost the magic of things happening in life because we had boxed ourselves in to such a routine. See, the other part of making that break was leaving the routine and having novelty show up. And that's where synchronicity comes from. That's where the riches that we have now, and, we're not financially, wealthy, but we're okay. And, we're much more appreciative of the riches that we have in terms of the friends that we have, in terms of how we spend our days, the freedom that we have, the projects that we're working on that we're so excited about. And it's a much more alive time than when we were back at that big place trying to figure out how we were going to pay for everything the next month.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for people who are looking to downsize?
My advice is don't take my advice. No, just kidding. I think that, first of all, doing it at a time when you have some people really work better when there's a gun to their heads. Other people prefer to have the time to sort through things. And I would say really take the time and enjoy the process of deciding what is your love now. What is it that really is part of your life at this time? And, if you can't let go, then don't let go. There's no law that says you have to let go. But I think that when we did our garage sales, one of the most enjoyable things about it was watching people totally in love with the things that they bought from us. They were so happy. We made so many people happy by taking things that we weren't using or were in storage somewhere, or we were keeping for this or that or the other thing, and just letting it go and just going, great, we'll take your money, not much money, but and you can have this. And we really saw how joyful it made people to find the things that they came for.
I want to remind our listeners, if you have a question for Steve, feel free to chat it, or you can call us at 919-518-9773 or Skype in at Computers 2K Voice. Now, you mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but I think this is so important. Can you talk about or give us a definition for sustainable happiness?
Sustainable happiness. Well, sustainable is something that doesn't require having to deeply, deeply, deeply invest. And what we found, what we call sustainable happiness, is that we recognize, we had to unhook our happiness from what we did or didn't have. Now, we've had periods of time, and we had one just 6 months ago or 5 months ago, where we were below zero. We were below zero. We don't have any savings. So we were below zero. And it felt very dangerous. It felt dangerous to be, a one car payment or non-payment away from having our car repossessed, and so on. And so we had to unhook our intrinsic happiness from the evidence around us about how well or not well we were doing. This is really difficult. For Trudy, it's been, I think it's easier for her. But for me, it was very, very, very hard to unhook my inner, who I am inner, with what the box score is saying out there. And, what we come to learn in any process that's challenging is we learn to create some degree of separation between the personality out there who thinks they're doing it and the being who's really being that being. In The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle talks about having that moment where he was in total despair and he wanted to kill himself, and the crazy thought came to him, well, if I want to kill myself, then who is the who that wants to do the killing, and who is the who that will be killed? And through this, simple paradox, he was able to liberate himself from identifying with this personality. So sustainable happiness is remembering that we are bigger than what's happening to us, that we're bigger than that. And there are various ways of doing that, and we've had to cultivate every one of them.
We've got a couple questions here for you on chat, Steve, that I want to get to. Chevrolet Man says, why didn't you just plan better? Have you always had issues with money?
Why didn't I plan better? Well, it turns out that both Trudy and I have had, when we look back at what we learned in our family, we laugh about how perfectly matched we are. She was overspend and I was under-earn, and those were the patterns that we learned as children. And as you begin to wake up, you begin to confront those. Were it not for this crisis, we never would have had to confront those and grow past them. So, why didn't you plan better? Well, let's go back to the past and do it differently. The fact is, it happened exactly the way it happened. And as a matter of fact, part of the responsibility that I have for my financial situation as it's been recently are the decisions that I made and didn't make, going back 30 or 40 years, going back to my childhood. So I'm not sloughing that off. I'm simply saying that this was a result of planning, of poor planning, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we do have these other friends who did everything right. They invested in all the right places. And my friend, the big mistake he made was he didn't listen to his psychic wife, who told her to sell all of the stocks. And they would have been able to own their home outright if they had done that. And he didn't want to pay the capital gains, and so they didn't do that. And the stock's worth over $1 million evaporated into virtually nothing. So my point is that there are people who played by all the rules, and there are people who didn't play by the rules. And a lot of times the people who played by the rules still had to undergo some financial shock and awe. Our situation was definitely a result of the choices that we made.
Now, Butch says, is your emotional state really that much better today? Don't you really want the house back?
We're going to have a house at some point. At some point, we will have a house that when we build up our financial energy to have a house, and that's appropriate, we'll have a house. At this point, we love exactly where we are. It's interesting. My wife, Trudy, was much more of the, someday we'll have this, and someday we'll have this, and someday we'll have this. And at this moment, she is totally overjoyed being here. Every day we get up, we laugh, we look at each other, and we say, we are so very grateful. And I try to think about it. Do I want that place back? How many people out there really want to go backwards in their lives? How many people want to have something back? Or do you suspect that there might be something in your future that's even more amazing, even more compelling than what you've had in the past? And in part, the holding on to what you've had, the fear of losing that, is really preventing you from the growth needed to get to, your true well-being.
Absolutely. I believe in that wholeheartedly and can cite many examples from my life where when I've let go, something better has come in, and that's a part about believing and having faith and trusting. Now, Sally J has a comment for you. She says, under-earning is low self-esteem. I had it, but now I make money, and this life is better. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's an oversimplification, and low self-esteem is due to a lot of things. And I think probably, my dad was an under-earner, and we were the poorest of all of our relations. And so partly what I subconsciously learned as a kid was, we had a belief in our family that people who had money were jerks. So I very conveniently adopted that subconscious belief, and it's taken me a while to unwrap that one and expose it and let it go. But I think our programming, what we've learned as children is very, in doing my book with Bruce Lipton, I learned that 95% of all of our operations as human beings is through our subconscious mind. So our conscious mind is the one that goes to the seminars and reads the books and does the affirmations. The subconscious mind is the one that's playing the program for when you were 6 months old or 6 years old or whatever. So it's not to say that we don't have responsibility, because if we're not responsible, who is? Once you've determined that there is a pattern and program at that point, then you're responsible to either accept it, release it, or transform it. And I think that part of this this evolutionary upwising and involuntary simplicity is a challenge to us to transform our lives. Maybe people out there haven't had the financial issues, but there's another issue. Could be health, could be fulfillment at work, could be finding a relationship or intimacy in the relationship that you have. Whatever area in our lives we came in to work with and transform, that's what seems to be up right now, doesn't it?
When I was looking at your blog and researching questions for tonight, one thing that you said that I really loved and I'd like you to talk about is, why do you say you're moving from survival to thrival?
Survival is what we've been taught. We've been taught that we are living in a dog-eat-dog world. It's survival of the fittest. And in working with Bruce Lipton and actually looking at what modern science has to say about survival of the fittest, that's actually not true. It's the thrival of the fittingest, that those organisms that most and best fit with the environment, that are serving the environment, those are the ones that thrive. So in the state of running to catch up to an overhead, that's a state of survival, and you're not quite surviving. In the state of living beneath your overhead, underneath the roof of your overhead, that's a state of thrival. We decided that involuntary simplicity and thrival meant having that abundance and prosperity meant having that which is required to thrive. I've got a friend who was one of these people who was a natural capitalist when he was a kid. And by the time he was 27 years old, he had become a millionaire several times over, went traveling around the world. And he found himself in Tibet. He was traveling in Tibet. and everything of his that he had with him was stolen. He had no wallet, no passport, no nothing. And even though he had a Mercedes back in the garage at home, he had to actually beg. He had to become a beggar for a period of time in order to get to where he could, get to the U.S. Embassy and redress some of this stuff. So having what is required as you require it, that is what true prosperity is. And, there are people out there. How much money is enough? When you have, if you had 100,000 in the bank, would that be enough? What about 10 million? Is that enough? For some people, simply being here today and knowing that somehow they'll be taken care of tomorrow, that's enough. That's a level of peace of mind that doesn't really require, having a big bank account. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I think that I believe in prosperity and abundance in the sense that I see a world where people are sharing their gifts and having what they require in order to receive gifts from other people. At the same time, if we look back on how we as a civilization have used our resources, we see that the people who are individuals who are out of resource are simply the canaries in the coal mine. It happened to us first. We are a civilization living well beyond our means. And the wake-up call for individuals living beyond their means. There's a great movie that we saw, a documentary called The Queen of Versailles. Have you seen The Queen of Versailles? Go Google that. It's about a very, very, very successful and wealthy family that are literally building a palace. It's a documentary. And in the midst of it, the economy goes kablooey, and all of a sudden their huge house with servants, they have to actually take care of it themselves. It's very, you feel a lot of compassion in this because we see reflections of our own, to whatever degree we're narcissistic, we see the reflections.
Absolutely. I'd say a lot of people are unhappy. What would you say to them?
Well, I think part of this, the idea of happiness, somebody said this to me a long time ago and I didn't buy it, but now it's making more sense, is that when you are able to give your gifts at the highest level, the more happiness that you create, the more happiness you have. It's kind of like in our civilization, because everything is so mechanistic, including how we are treated as soon as we come out of the womb. Maybe now there are more natural childbirths, but for most of us, we were put into a container, taken away from our mother, given a bottle and not a breast. And so we have learned from this moment of separation that what we need is outside of ourselves. And in indigenous cultures, there's the rite of passage where we make the passage from being dependent on our parents to having our own connection with the divine. And we have no rite of passage in this civilization. So we have a world full of people looking to get something from outside of themselves. It could be looking to get something in a relationship. It could be looking to get something financial. It could be looking to get somebody's energy. It could be looking to get what they own. And part of the upwising and waking up is recognizing and making the connections between who we are and getting our needs met from the inside out, getting the basic intrinsic emotional needs and spiritual needs met so that we don't look outside ourselves to stuff or collected relationships or whatever it is we do to keep from being our divine selves, the various addictions that we have. So having your life shaken up like this is a great opportunity to try on something new.
Now, Steve, there are a couple questions I like to ask each guest. The first, you mentioned at the beginning about the dark night of the soul. You were really challenged about 5 or 6 months ago. What would you say to someone who's in a place similar to that right now? What advice do you have for them?
Go through it and be with it. Embrace it and say, bring it on. Bring it on, bring it on, bring it on. Because as I'm learning, I'm working with a wonderful, brilliant healer, Donnie Epstein, who's the creator of network spinal analysis.
Oh, I want him on the show. I emailed him. He never wrote me back.
He's traveling around
NSA.
the world. I'll get him. So Donnie and I are writing a book called Pain to Progress. And one of the things that he's discovered in his work is that the thing that causes the most suffering is resisting suffering. So when you surrender, what that means is you go, I give up. I give up. You let it wash over you. If you've had this happen with a physical ache, sometimes you can diminish it by simply going into it and going, I want more of that. Make it bigger, 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 bigger. And at some point, your whole body takes it on, and wherever that spot is, it's diminished. So when you're going through it, be there with it. Embrace it and say, this is the gateway to my progress.
And the other question, because I'm always about getting off the couch, we have a little segment. I want people to take action. That's the reason I do the show, for them to share their gifts, get rid of all their issues, and to be the brilliant people that they're meant to be. What advice, what one action they can take tonight, tomorrow, at some point? What can they do to reawaken their brilliance?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is breathing. That's the key to long life, as long as you keep breathing. The Heart Math Institute, a wonderful outfit called the Heart Math Institute, and they've developed this technique to actually measure heart coherence. And there's a way of breathing. If you imagine simply breathing in and out through your nose, and then begin to feel your heart, and begin to breathe in and out of your heart, just slowly and gently, and then feel like there's something warm there. I imagine that I'm petting these 2 or 3 little puppies, these soft puppies, and that's what's in my heart. And what happens is when you create that heart coherence, then the quality of your thoughts up level. You change your body chemistry from the fight or flight chemistry, which is great if you're fighting or fleeing. But if you're wanting to think creatively and design a compelling future for yourself, then you're going to much rather want to be in this peaceful state of equanimity. The other thing is that perhaps the most powerful underused tool that we have is the tool of nothing. So when nothing helps, do nothing. Go into the space of complete emptiness, because the way to solve a problem is to find something absolutely new. And you won't find the absolutely new in what you've already done. So just as surely as a painter begins with an empty canvas and a writer begins with a blank page, give yourself that blank page by going into the silence for a period of time. Could be just 5 minutes, where every time you have a thought about something, you just kind of let it go, let it go. I have found just recently, facing what I thought was an intractable problem, simply dropping the question into the silence. I made it into a question because answers are closed-ended and questions are open-ended. We want questions. And by the next morning, before I knew it, I had the solution, and the solution manifested and fully manifested within 3 days.
Fantastic. Now, Steve, how can people learn more information about you? Can you share your website?
Yes, I'm reachable at wakeuplaughing.com, wakeuplaughing.com. You want to send me an email, there's a contact button. I read all my emails. You can feel free to do that. I'm also on Facebook, but really best way is connect with me through email.
Fantastic. We want to thank you for having you on tonight and Skyping in from California. And I'm serious about Donald Epstein. I see an NSA chiropractor who's been on the show a couple times, and I swear by it. I think that he's genius. So,
absolutely, I totally recommend it. It's beyond what I would have imagined. And I'm getting care every week, and energetically, it's made a huge difference.
Outstanding. Well, we appreciate it, and I want to thank everyone for listening. And our next Thrive event has been posted. It's March 5th, and it's going to be on reducing anxiety and managing stress. So if the little things in life are bugging you out or you can't manage your stress, we've got a great body, mind, spirit panel that can help you out with all of that. If you go to reawakenyourbrilliance.com, under the Thrive series, you'll find all the pertinent information. We want to thank Delta Force Technologies for sponsoring that, and we'll see everyone here next week. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays 9 a.m. till noon. Carrie's Psychic Cafe with Carrie Silkowski, Sundays 8 till 9 p.m. Health In with Debbie Bruck, Mondays 11 a.m. till noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays 8 till 9 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays, 9 till 10 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by ThatVidBlasterGuy.com, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.